Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating 2024 Supreme Court decision. It's about a brutal fiesta brawl that took an absolutely agonizing 17 years to resolve. We're looking at a case that sits right at the intersection of raw human survival, severe judicial delay, and the strict interpretation of the law. Just picture the scenario for a second. A man is suddenly attacked by an aggressor swinging a long bolo knife. He loses a finger trying to parry the blade barehanded, gets stabbed in the abdomen so severely that his intestines are literally exposed, and yet, despite all of that, he still manages to save his pinned-down nephew from being killed. His reward from the trial court? A conviction for homicide. Yeah, you heard that right. How does a victim who acted to save his own family end up taking the fall? Well, let's unpack the facts. Section 1. A fight for survival. The night of the fiesta. To understand how the justice system got this so wrong, we have to travel back to the night of May 24, 2006, during a local coronation program in Bohol. The nightmare began with a sudden, completely unprovoked attack by a man named Andres Muring. He came in heavily armed and actively seeking out Floro over a perceived insult from earlier that day, something about a parked motorcycle. So Andres rolls up on his bike, spots Floro right away, and shouts, "What do you want, Pri? We will kill each other." And without even waiting for an answer, he attacks Floro with a massive 15 to 24-inch bolo. No warning, no de-escalation, just immediate, lethal violence right in the middle of a public celebration. When you look at the clinical data, the reality of who was actually attacking whom becomes undeniably clear. Just look at the absolute devastation Floro and his family endured. We're talking about a severed right ring finger from desperately trying to block the blade, eviscerated intestines, plus multiple slashed wrists and incised wounds on his nephews, Eric and Rother. Now compare that to the aggressor. Andres sustained just one single fatal stab wound to his right lower armpit. Looking at these injuries side by side, the power dynamic and the truth of who was defending themselves is just crystal clear. Which brings us to Section 2, the flawed conviction, how the lower court got it wrong. Because what's truly baffling about this case is how the trial court looked at a man literally holding his own protruding intestines and still decided, yep, we're going to convict him of homicide. You really have to see the sheer absurdity of the lower court's theory compared to the actual evidence-based reality that the Supreme Court eventually acknowledged. The trial court somehow dreamed up this scenario where Floro and his relatives formed an armed posse, waited for Andres, pointed a gun at him, made him trip backward, and then attacked him while he was helpless on the ground. But the Supreme Court looked at the exact same evidence and saw reality. Floro retreated unarmed, parried a bolo barehanded, and grabbed a bayonet from his motorcycle solely to save his pinned-down nephew. The lower court completely ignored the physical reality of Floro's horrific defensive wounds to push a totally unsupported theory. That brings us to Section 3, a 17-year ordeal, the procedural nightmare. Because before we even talk about reversing that bogus homicide charge, we absolutely have to address the massive procedural failure that kept Floro stuck in legal limbo. The notoriously slow wheels of the justice system took 9 years just to reach that flawed decision. Floro was arrested in 2006, but he didn't even see his pretrial start until 2008. The regional trial court dragged its feet until 2015 to issue a conviction, and it wasn't until 2024 that the Supreme Court finally handed down its decision. Think about that. That is an 18-year gap from the night of the fiesta to total vindication. That's nearly 2 decades of a man's life completely suspended. 2031. That's the total number of days that elapsed just between the start of the direct examination and the last trial date. And it was filled with unexplained postponements and absent witnesses. We're talking about prosecutors not showing up because they allegedly had a fever, but providing 0 medical certificates, bringing the totally wrong witnesses to court, and judges just going on leave. It was an absolute procedural nightmare that completely trampled on the basic rights of the accused. Unsurprisingly, the Supreme Court firmly ruled that Floro's constitutional right to a speedy trial was overwhelmingly violated by these oppressive delays. As they put it, this right is violated when proceedings are attended by vexatious, capricious, and oppressive delays. Legally speaking, the sheer number of these ridiculous delays was enough to just throw the whole case out. But thankfully, the Supreme Court went even further to actually clear his name on the merits of what went down that night. So let's dive into that substantive legal failure in Section 4, Defense of a Relative, unpacking Article 11, Paragraph 2. The Supreme Court made a beautiful point here, noting that the specific law is founded on the very human impulse to rush into great peril to rescue those bound to us by blood. Under the revised penal code, acting in defense of a relative, spouses, descendants, or relatives by consanguinity within the fourth civil degree is a justifying circumstance. It completely exempts a person from criminal liability. In this explainer, we're looking at Floro defending his nephew Eric, which fits this legal definition perfectly. But it's not a free pass. The Supreme Court applied 3 strict legal requirements to the chaos of that fiesta. To successfully invoke this defense, you have to prove 3 things. Number 1, unlawful aggression by the attacker. Number 2, reasonable necessity of the means employed by the defender. And number 3, lack of provocation by the defender. Let's see how they stack up. Starting with step 1, unlawful aggression. Did Andres initiate the attack unprovoked? Yes. Did he severely wound Floro? Definitely. Did he actively pin down and attack Eric, the nephew? Yes. And was he ever actually disarmed before Floro stopped him? No way. The crucial takeaway here is that the unlawful aggression never stopped. Andres remained a clear, active danger to Floro's nephews as long as he was holding that bolo. The lower courts tried to argue the aggression had ceased, but the Supreme Court basically said, look, you cannot say a man actively hacking at a family with a 2-foot braid is suddenly no longer a threat. Now for step 2, reasonable necessity. Keep in mind, Floro was already severely wounded. He managed to open his motorcycle U-box, grab a bayonet, and rush back into the fray while literally holding his own abdomen. The Supreme Court found that a single stab wound to the aggressor's armpit was a perfectly reasonable way to stop a relentless lethal attack. I mean, Floro didn't hack the guy to pieces, right? He delivered one single blow to neutralize a man wildly attacking his family. Given the insane circumstances, it was entirely proportionate. And finally, step 3, lack of provocation. The trial court somehow assumed Floro mutually agreed to this fight, which had absolutely zero basis in the evidence. Floro didn't provoke a thing. He was completely unarmed, just attending a public event, when the aggressor specifically sought him out hours after a minor disagreement over a parked motorcycle. So check, check, and check. All 3 legal requirements for defense of a relative were clearly met. This brings us to Section 5, the final verdict, state of mind and justification. This is where the Supreme Court really hands a final smackdown to the lower court's armchair quarterbacking. See, the law doesn't demand perfect, calm judgment from someone desperately trying to save their family while holding their own intestines in. As the court wisely noted, the test is whether his subjective belief about the danger was reasonable, considering he had 0 time to reflect or reason out his responses. The trial court actually faulted Floro for not acting with the poise of someone sitting in a calm, safe room. Thankfully, the Supreme Court corrected this, firmly grounding the law in human reality, adrenaline, and raw survival instinct. Delivering complete and total vindication, the Supreme Court reversed the lower courts, finding Floro's actions to be completely justified under the law. Floro Glorio Jacobus was officially acquitted and declared not civilly liable. He was protecting his blood relative from an ongoing, lethal threat, doing exactly what the law and human nature really allows. I want to leave you with this final thought to consider about the immense gap between raw survival instincts and the sluggish administration of justice. If the law of nature forced you to make a split-second choice to save your family, should the justice system take 17 years to understand it? It is a deeply sobering reality to reflect upon. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and stay focused.